they didn't just leave. They vanished. In a move that stunned the entire global auto industry, Toyota, Honda, and Nissan have pulled the plug on the US market, and the consequences are erupting like a chain reaction. These are not just car companies. They're institutions. Icons. And they're walking away from the second largest auto market on earth. Why? One name, Donald Trump. After sweeping tariffs made it virtually impossible to stay profitable, Japan's three industrial titans decided they'd had enough. This isn't just business. This is a geopolitical earthquake, shaking everything from supply chains to small-town economies, from trade diplomacy to cultural identity. Millions of jobs. Billions in investment. Decades of trust gone in a flash. And now, the question that haunts America's highways. If Toyota, Honda, and Nissan can disappear overnight, what's next? Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning of collapse. Part 1, the collapse of the big three, Toyota, Honda, Nissan. Flip the switch off. No press conferences. No soft landings. Just a cold, coordinated shutdown. In a stunning move, Toyota CEO Koji Sato, Nissan's Makoto Uchida, and Honda's Toshihiro Maebe stepped forward together to deliver a joint message that detonated like a bomb. All three Japanese giants are exiting the US auto market. This wasn't gradual. It wasn't partial. It was a total severance. Immediate. Surgical. Brutal. The reason? Trump's newly enacted trade tariffs, a financial death sentence for any foreign automaker trying to operate on American soil. Under the new policy, every imported car, part, and component now carries a tariff so steep that profit margins collapse on arrival. Even vehicles partially assembled in North America weren't spared. It was checkmate. Behind closed doors, analysts believe the Japanese automakers saw the writing on the wall months ago. Internal memos, government consultations, boardroom calls all pointed to one unavoidable conclusion: the US had become too hostile to stay. And so they made a decision no one thought possible: pull out. Cut losses. Abandon a market they helped build over 4 decades. But this isn't just a business story. It's a strategic retreat from a country once seen as a cornerstone of growth. And while many still believe it's temporary, Japan isn't coming back. Because what happened next was far worse than anyone imagined. Part 2, hundreds of thousands jobless, America's heartland becomes a dead zone. The factory gates didn't just close, they slammed shut. Almost overnight, entire communities across Kentucky, Ohio, Alabama, and Tennessee were plunged into economic chaos. These weren't just assembly lines, they were lifelines. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan had embedded themselves so deeply into these towns that local schools, hospitals, and small businesses literally grew around them. Now, silence. Tens of thousands laid off in a single week. No warnings. No transitions. Just pink slips, shuttered plants, and stunned families. In Georgetown, Kentucky, once the proud home of the largest Toyota plant in North America, workers left the facility in tears, some after 20 or 30 years of loyal service. Nearby suppliers, from parts manufacturers to logistics firms, began collapsing like dominoes. Specialized companies that built their entire model around Japanese car components were suddenly obsolete. But it wasn't just blue-collar workers. Engineers, designers, IT teams, even dealership owners. All cut. Local tax revenues vanished. Public services crumbled. Entire counties are now racing toward bankruptcy. What once looked like American manufacturing success stories now resemble industrial graveyards. And just when people thought it couldn't get worse, the supply chain imploded. Because the departure of these automakers didn't just destroy jobs. It shattered everything that kept the U.S. auto industry moving. Part 3, the U.S. auto industry exposed, not ready, not capable, not enough. At first glance, it looked like a win for America's big three: Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. With their biggest competitors gone, they now controlled the field. But within days, the illusion cracked. They simply weren't ready. Factories weren't tooled to produce the kinds of cars Americans were suddenly demanding: affordable hybrids, fuel-efficient sedans, and compact SUVs, categories once dominated by the Japanese. And with global supply chains still tangled, domestic automakers couldn't ramp up fast enough. Shortages exploded. Inventory dried up. Prices soared. At Ford dealerships, buyers were met with waitlists stretching months. GM tried to accelerate EV production, but lacked critical parts and skilled labor. Stellantis was even worse off, heavily invested in trucks and performance vehicles, but out of touch with what the middle class now needed. Consumers were trapped. Fewer options. Higher prices. Delays everywhere. The American car market became a chaotic mess overnight. And here's the irony: the very tariffs meant to protect American companies ended up crippling them instead. They had no backup. No resilience. For decades, they leaned on competition from Japan to keep quality up and costs down. Now, with that pressure gone, they're flailing. And this chaos isn't just about production lines or missed sales targets. Because what started as a trade war is now turning into a diplomatic fracture. And the shockwaves are hitting U.S. alliances where it hurts most. Part 4: Japan fires back, from ally to adversary in one stroke. This wasn't just a business exit. It was a diplomatic warning shot. When Toyota, Honda, and Nissan pulled out, Tokyo wasn't silent. Behind closed doors, senior Japanese officials expressed quiet outrage. The tariffs didn't just disrupt trade, they humiliated one of America's closest allies. Decades of trust were shattered in a matter of weeks. And Japan retaliated, not with missiles, but with markets. Government-backed investments once earmarked for U.S. manufacturing were rerouted to Southeast Asia, India, and Africa. Strategic partnerships in clean energy, AI, and mobility tech were suspended or redirected to nations viewed as more stable. Even joint defense tech projects, long seen as untouchable, were suddenly under review. This wasn't economic warfare. It was a recalibration of allegiance. Because to Tokyo, this wasn't just about cars, it was about dignity. Japan had invested billions in America not out of charity, but out of partnership. And now, that partnership had been publicly, painfully discarded. Diplomats warned that we are witnessing the slow unraveling of a post-war alliance that once anchored peace in the Pacific. Trade has always been the bridge. Now, with that bridge on fire, even military and climate cooperation are at risk. And while politicians in D.C. scramble to contain the fallout, the cultural and psychological impact on the American people was already spreading. Because what vanished wasn't just a brand. It was trust. And that's not something you can rebuild with a factory. Part 5: The Silent Collapse, when innovation, culture, and identity vanish. Not all casualties leave headlines. Some just disappear quietly. For decades, Japanese automakers were more than manufacturers, they were innovators, educators, and cultural pillars embedded in the very DNA of American life. Their departure didn't just eliminate cars. It unplugged an entire ecosystem of knowledge, identity, and opportunity. Across the country, technical colleges and vocational schools that train students to service Honda engines or diagnose Toyota electronics now face collapse. Entire curriculums are obsolete overnight. Young people who invested years into specialized certifications are now stranded, their skills no longer matching a shrinking market. But it goes deeper. Research partnerships between U.S. universities and Japanese auto giants, once responsible for breakthroughs in battery technology, robotics, and sustainable engineering, have been terminated. Billions in R&D funding is gone. The flow of innovation between East and West? Severed. Even pop culture feels the sting. The Civic that starred in street racing culture. The Supra that became a legend in video games and film. The Z-Series that defined a generation of tuners. Gone. These vehicles weren't just metal and rubber, they were symbols of reliability, of pragmatism, of immigrant stories and middle-class dreams. Now, their absence is rewriting what America sees in its driveways, highways, and movie screens. And while politicians argue over tariffs and trade balances, a quieter erosion is taking place. One that hits the soul, not the spreadsheet. Because when culture and innovation are stripped away, what's left isn't strength. It's emptiness. This isn't just a story about tariffs or car companies. It's about what happens when global trust breaks, when decades of cooperation, culture, and competition collapse under the weight of short-term politics. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan didn't just walk away from a market. They walked away from an idea, the belief that America was a stable partner in a connected world. Now, the US stands at a crossroads. The factories are quiet. The supply chains are broken. And the legacy of Japanese excellence is fading from our streets. But the real question isn't who left. It's who's next. Because once the world sees that even giants can be pushed out, no one feels safe. And the American auto industry? It's no longer leading. It's chasing ghosts.